Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into one of those stories that crawls under your skin, the kind that starts quietly with a folded piece of paper and ends up changing how you see an entire family. You probably won't survive this story. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to watch the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I'm doing here. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan for some soothing noise, and let's comfortably embark on tonight's journey. I remember the exact moment the envelope slid through my mailbox. It was creamy white with gold lettering, embossed and perfect like something printed for people who never had dirt under their fingernails. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Emily Carter and Daniel Blake. Emily, my granddaughter. My only granddaughter. My heart stumbled over her name. I held the envelope like it might crumble. I hadn't seen her in 3 years, not since that Thanksgiving argument about the land sale. Funny how families can fracture over things that don't even matter once you start counting the years left ahead of you. The card smelled faintly of perfume, the kind Emily used to sneak from her mother's dresser when she was 16. But the handwriting wasn't hers. It was printed sterile perfect. No personal note, no "Grandpa, can't wait to see you." Just my name and the address typed beneath a glossy logo of the wedding venue in the city. It felt like getting invited to a stranger's celebration, not a family event. Still, I ran my thumb over the edges and smiled anyway. Because when you've outlived your brothers, your parents, and most of your friends, you take any invitation to feel included. I placed it carefully on the kitchen table next to a coffee cup that had cooled hours ago. The house was too quiet. The radio in the corner hissed faintly between stations. I hadn't fixed it in months. I thought about how Emily used to dance to that same radio when she was little, spinning around barefoot, while I pretended not to see the scratches she left on the wooden floor. That was before the distance grew between us, before my son decided my way of living was outdated. People still debate whether old age makes you bitter or just more aware of what really counts. Maybe it's both. When I called my son to confirm, he sounded polite, not warm, not hostile, just rehearsed. "Of course, Dad, we'd love to have you there. It means a lot." But I could hear his wife whispering something in the background, her voice sharp and low, like a reminder. "He's still bringing that truck?" she asked, not knowing I could hear. I swallowed the sting. Pride is a strange thing. It gets smaller with age, but hurts just the same. After I hung up, I went out to the porch. The evening light was soft, painting long shadows across the yard. The oak tree stood in the distance, massive and scarred, a survivor of every storm that had ever passed through this town. Its branches were thick, reaching up like arms that refused to surrender. That tree was older than my marriage, older than my children, and it had seen things none of them remembered, like the hurricane of '89. That nearly took our roof and our lives. The roots of that tree had saved us, literally. I ran my hand over its bark, tracing the deep grooves that felt almost like skin. I remembered nailing swings onto its lower branch, remembered my wife sitting under it with lemonade and that lazy smile she never lost. When she passed, I carved her initials into the trunk MC right beneath where Emily used to climb. My granddaughter called it Grandma's tree, but time changes things. Now they called it the old oak behind Grandpa's place. That night I sat in the workshop, the same one I'd built 50 years ago, with recycled nails and stubbornness. I opened the invitation again under the yellow light of my desk lamp. I thought about showing up with a check or maybe a store-bought gift from the registry. But then, what message would that send? That I had money to offer, not memories. So instead, I decided I'd give her something of my own hands, something built with love and the wood of the tree that had saved her family before she was even born. There's a saying among carpenters, every cut remembers the hand that made it. I believed that. My father taught me that when I was barely old enough to hold a chisel. He said, wood holds stories better than people do. So I pulled out my old plans, rough sketches from years ago when I'd first thought of building a rocking chair for my wife. I never finished it after she passed. Maybe this was my chance to finish something that had been waiting all this time. The next morning, the smell of sawdust filled the air. It's strange how familiar smells can calm your nerves better than any therapy session. The radio crackled again, static mixed with a country song from a decade I barely remembered. I took the first plank from the oak, sanded it until the surface shone. My hands ached, but the pain was satisfying, like proof that I could still make something that mattered. I imagined Emily in her white dress, sitting down on that chair laughing the way her grandmother once did. Maybe she'd feel the warmth of the wood, the memory beneath the polish. Maybe she'd remember where she came from. Or maybe she'd just see an old man's handmade furniture and smile out of pity. Either way, I had to do it. Because some gifts aren't meant to impress, they're meant to remind. By sunset, I had the frame ready. I traced a small pattern along the armrest, the shape of an oak leaf, subtle, almost invisible unless you looked closely. That was my signature. I'd learned a long time ago that legacy isn't loud. It's quiet, buried inside the grain of time. As I locked the workshop door, the chair half finished behind me, I looked up at the tree once more. The wind whispered through its branches, and for a second, I swear it sounded like my wife's voice, gentle, amused, patient. "You're doing the right thing," I could almost hear her say. People still debate whether we build things to last or to be remembered. I think sometimes it's both. The morning sun slid through my workshop window like a blade cutting across the dust and sawdust floating in the air. The chair stood in the center, half-born, waiting for its soul. I brewed a pot of bitter coffee, black, no sugar, no cream, and took the first sip, with my eyes still fixed on the wood. You know that feeling when something old inside you wakes up? That's what building does to me. I hadn't worked like this in years, not since my hands started trembling after the stroke. But that chair, it was calling me like it had been waiting since the day my wife died. I pulled out my tools, the same ones my father left me in his will. He'd carved his initials HC into the hammer handle. People forget how much we inherit that isn't money. He used to say, "When you fix something, boy, you're fixing a bit of yourself, too." I guess that's what I was doing now. Fixing a piece of myself that had splintered after losing her, after losing the laughter that once filled this place. As I planed down the seat, the wood released that rich scent, earthy and deep. The kind that clings to your clothes. There's something spiritual about working with oak. It resists you. It demands patience. You can't rush it. And maybe that's why I chose it. Because patience is what this family lost. My son Michael runs through life like there's a stopwatch in his pocket. My daughter-in-law Karen manages everything with checklists and deadlines. Even Emily, sweet Emily. She grew up learning that faster meant better. But families don't grow that way. They take time. Roots take time. I laughed softly at that thought and took a sip of my cooling coffee. Then I remembered something strange. That tree, the one behind my house, wasn't just any tree. It was planted by my grandfather after he came home from the war. Family rumor says he dragged a broken branch halfway across the county because it had shielded him during a shelling. People still debate whether that story is true, but I like to think it is. Maybe that's why the tree felt sacred, because it had already been through battles before we were even born. By noon, I'd sanded the legs, smoothed each curve, fitting neatly into its joint. My hands hurt, but it was the kind of pain that made me feel alive. The kind that says, you're still here, you still matter. I turned on the radio again, and for once it worked, humming out an old Johnny Cash song. The rhythm kept me company as I drove nails into the frame, steady and slow. Somewhere between the third verse and my second cup of coffee, I started talking to the chair. You're not just a seat, you know. You're a message. And in that lonely room, it didn't sound as crazy as it should have. When I took a break, I sat outside on the porch looking at the stump of another tree, one that had fallen years ago in a lightning storm. That's when I remembered the night the oak saved us. It was 1989, the hurricane that tore roofs off half the county. The wind howled like a freight train. I remember holding the door shut with my shoulder, my wife clutching Michael and his sister in the hallway. I thought we were gone for sure. Then we heard a cracking sound. The oak had split in two, but instead of falling on the house, it collapsed sideways, shielding the roof from the debris that flew like knives. If it hadn't fallen that exact way, I wouldn't be here telling this story. I never told that part to the kids properly. They were too young, and I guess life just moved on. But that night I swore I'd never cut that tree down unless I could turn it into something that mattered, something that would carry our story forward. So when a storm finally weakened one of its limbs a few years ago, I saved the wood. I didn't know what for until now. Inside the workshop, I traced my wife's initials again, MC, into the underside of the chair, hidden, not visible unless you flipped it over. That was our little secret. She always hated attention but loved permanence. I could almost hear her teasing me, you and your old sentimental nonsense. She used to say, love doesn't live in objects, it lives in gestures. Maybe she was right, but I've learned that gestures fade. Wood doesn't. I worked until dusk when the sunlight turned golden and the cicadas started their evening chorus. My shirt was soaked through. My back stiff, my hands raw, but the chair had shape now. The backrest curved perfectly sturdy, but elegant. The armrests bore small deliberate carvings of acorns and leaves, little nods to the tree it came from. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't modern. But it was honest. When I finally stepped back, the sight of it made something inside me ache. It reminded me of all the family dinners where laughter filled the air, and of how quiet those dinners became after my wife passed. I thought about Emily as a kid, the way she'd run into the kitchen yelling, "Grandpa, tell me a story," and how she'd listen wide-eyed as I made up tales about knights and giants and trees that could talk. Somewhere along the line, she stopped asking for stories. Maybe I stopped telling them too soon. That night, I sat by the workshop window watching the stars come out. It was one of those clear nights where every constellation looked sharp enough to touch. I thought about how everything we build eventually turns into memory. Maybe that's what legacy really means, building things that hold stories even after your voice is gone. Before I went to bed, I placed my hand on the chair's backrest and whispered, "She'll understand one day." Then I covered it with an old sheet to keep the dust off. People still debate whether love can survive. Distance between towns, between generations, between hearts that no longer speak the same language. I think love can survive anything, as long as you build it strong enough. The morning of the drive started quiet, like the world was holding its breath. I loaded the chair carefully into the back of my old Ford truck, wrapping it with the same blanket my wife used to knit by the fire. It smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. The sky was gray, the kind of color that makes memories feel closer. I stood there for a moment, hands on the tailgate, looking at that chair one last time, before tying it down. You know how sometimes when you're about to leave home, you feel like the walls are watching you. That's what it felt like the house knew I wasn't just taking a gift, I was taking a piece of its story with me. The road stretched out ahead, long and empty. I've always liked driving alone, the rhythm of the tires, the low hum of the engine, the way the world unspools like a movie you've already seen. But this drive felt different. The closer I got to the city, the smaller I started to feel. The buildings grew taller, the signs brighter, the people faster. Somewhere along the way, I realized I'd forgotten to eat breakfast, but I didn't care. My stomach was too tight with nerves anyway. I just kept thinking about how Emily would look, grown radiant, maybe a stranger now. I stopped once for gas at a roadside diner. The waitress looked at the chair in the truck and smiled. "Nice piece," she said, chewing gum. "Antique?" I shook my head. "Handmade. For my granddaughter's wedding." She whistled softly. "She's a lucky girl. Not many folks still build things with their hands." I smiled but didn't answer. I didn't want to tell her that luck had nothing to do with it, that love and guilt often share the same set of tools. Back on the highway, I passed the old bridge near Pine Hollow, the same one we crossed during the hurricane years ago, fleeing to the shelter. I remembered the weight of that night, the roar of the wind, the fear in my wife's eyes, the way little Michael had clung to my leg, crying. That bridge had swayed under us, but we made it. That's when the tree fell, blocking the road behind us, protecting the house we thought we'd lost. When we came back days later, the tree was split open like a wound, but the house stood untouched. My wife cried when she saw it. She said, "That tree took the hit for us." People still debate whether trees can sense things, whether they choose where to fall. I don't know, but that night convinced me some things in nature carry purpose. By the time I reached the city limits, the air had changed. It smelled like gasoline and ambition. My hands gripped the wheel tighter. The GPS told me the wedding venue was a heritage estate, one of those fancy, restored mansions people rent for pictures and prestige. When I pulled into the parking area, all glass and manicured lawns, I could feel eyes on me. My truck didn't belong there. Neither did I. I parked as far from the shiny cars as I could, near the service entrance, where deliveries were coming in. I got out, straightened my jacket, and opened the back. The chair gleamed faintly under the overcast sky, the oak polished and proud. I lifted it gently, my arms straining but steady. A man in a black suit approached me, clipboard in hand. "Sir, are you with the decorators?" he asked. "No," I said. "Family." He blinked, unsure. Of course. The ceremony is in the garden. You can leave that inside the hall." He pointed toward a side door like he didn't want to say chair out loud, afraid it might contaminate the luxury. I carried it through the doorway anyway, the sound of its wooden legs tapping softly against the marble floor. Inside, everything smelled expensive. Fresh flowers, champagne polished silver. My shoes squeaked embarrassingly on the clean tile. I caught my reflection in a mirror-old suit, tired eyes sawdust under the nails. For a second I thought about turning back, but then I saw her, Emily, my granddaughter. She stood across the hall in her white dress, a halo of curls, and light laughing with her bridesmaids. She looked so much like her grandmother, it nearly broke me. I froze, afraid that if I moved, I'd ruin the picture. She noticed me, then our eyes met and her laughter softened into surprise. "Grandpa," she mouthed. I smiled, nodded, lifted a hand. But before she could come closer, my son appeared beside her, his arm guiding her away toward a photographer. He gave me a polite nod, the kind that says, "We'll talk later." I swallowed hard. Sure, I muttered to myself, though no one was listening. I found a quiet corner and placed the chair there next to a table covered with crystal glasses. For a while, I just stood beside it, watching the world spin around me. The younger guests walked by in perfect suits and dresses, their phones flashing like they were capturing evidence of their own importance. One woman whispered to another, glancing at my chair. I caught the word rustic, not the flattering kind. I took a seat nearby and rubbed my knees. A little boy came up, curious, maybe 6 or 7 years old. "Did you make that?" he asked. "Sure did," I said, smiling. "From an old tree behind my house." He ran his hand along the armrest. "It feels warm. Good wood always does," I told him. "It remembers the sun." He nodded like he understood more than most adults there. Then his mother called him away before he could ask more questions. That night, when the lights flickered on for the reception, I could already feel the distance between me and everyone else, widening like I was an artifact someone forgot to put in the museum display. But I told myself to hold on, because tomorrow when Emily walked down that aisle, I'd give her the chair. And maybe, just maybe, she'd understand what it meant. People still debate whether family ties fade or just get quieter with time. I think sometimes they don't fade at all. We just stop speaking the same emotional language. The next morning, sunlight poured through the high windows of the estate like liquid gold. I woke earlier than anyone else, and walked the empty garden paths. The dew clung to my shoes, and the air smelled of roses and wet stone. Birds chirped somewhere in the distance, unaware that today was supposed to be perfect, spotless, orchestrated, expensive. I carried my coffee in a paper cup from the catering kitchen, the only one kind enough to serve me before breakfast. They called me sir in that polite tone used for guests who clearly didn't belong. I wandered back into the hall where the ceremony would take place. The staff were already setting up rows of pristine white chairs, factory perfect, identical, soulless. My wooden chair sat in the corner under a curtain of light. The contrast made me chuckle. It looked almost stubborn, like an old man refusing to wear a tuxedo to a black tie event. I ran my hand over the oak surface, smooth, strong. The carvings of acorns gleamed faintly. I whispered, "Hold steady, old friend. They'll see you soon." A few hours later, the guests started arriving. Luxury perfume filled the air, mingling with laughter that sounded more like competition than joy. I stood near the back, trying to stay out of the way. I saw Michael, my son, moving quickly between tables, shaking hands with people who looked too important to remember his name the next day. He wore a dark suit, crisp and proud. When he finally noticed me, his smile flickered like a bad signal. "Dad." "You made it," he said, coming closer. "I wouldn't miss it for the world," I replied, keeping my voice calm. He nodded, glancing behind me at the chair. "Is that yours?" "It's Emily's," I said. "A wedding gift from the old oak." His eyes tightened slightly. "Oh, right, that tree." He cleared his throat. "Listen, Dad. It's beautiful, really, but maybe we could keep it out of the main ceremony area. You know, just for aesthetics." Aesthetics. That word burned. I smiled thinly. "Sure, son. You do what you need to." He patted my arm. "I'll make sure it's safe, don't worry." And just like that, he walked away, not out of cruelty, but out of embarrassment. He was managing his image, his reputation, his wife's expectations. I understood. I just didn't like it. When Emily came out in her gown, the crowd turned. She was stunning, radiant, in a way that made me forget the world outside those walls. The music began, and I caught her glancing toward me for half a second before stepping onto the aisle. That look, small, fleeting, was enough to make my throat tighten. It said, "I see you, Grandpa." After the ceremony, everyone flowed into the reception hall like champagne bubbles. The air was thick with congratulations and self-satisfaction. I stood quietly near the buffet, nibbling on something I couldn't pronounce. That's when I heard the first laugh. A group of young men, probably friends of the groom, were gathered around my chair. One of them tapped it and said, "What's this? Some kind of folk art?" Another replied, "Looks like it came from a flea market." They chuckled. One even sat on it briefly, then got up, shaking his head. "It creaks. Definitely handmade." Their laughter echoed off the marble walls. I took a breath, counted to 5, then walked toward them. "Careful with that," I said softly. They looked up, startled. "Oh, sorry, sir," one of them muttered, not really meaning it. "We didn't know it was yours." "It's not mine," I said. "It's hers." I nodded toward Emily. "It's her gift." Their smiles faded slightly, replaced with polite confusion. "Oh," one said, "that's nice." Then they walked away, embarrassed but not ashamed. The kind of embarrassment that only lasts a few seconds before turning into another story to laugh about later. I sat down at a nearby table, heart thudding. I wasn't angry, not really. Just hollow. Because I'd seen that same kind of laughter before, the kind people use when they don't understand something but want to prove they're above it. My wife used to call it defensive laughter. She said people mock what they fear might matter. As the evening wore on, the music grew louder, the crowd drunker. My son gave a speech that mentioned hard work, new beginnings, family values, all the right words in the wrong order. He didn't mention his mother. He didn't mention me. I raised my glass anyway. That's what fathers do. Then came the gift opening. The couple sat under the chandelier while guests gathered around, clapping after every ribbon torn and every branded box revealed. There were appliances, luxury toasters, gold-trimmed cutlery things no one would remember a year from now. My chair sat off to the side, ignored. When Emily finally reached it, she smiled nervously. "Oh, Grandpa's chair." She stood and walked over her heels, clicking on the floor. Everyone watched. Someone whispered, "How sweet." She ran her fingers along the wood, looked at me, then at the crowd. "He made it himself," she said softly. A few polite claps followed. Her voice trembled as she added, "From the tree behind his house." A woman's voice, somewhere in the crowd, said, "That's unusual." Another laughed lightly. "Rustic charm." Emily smiled weakly, then moved on to the next gift. The moment passed like a breeze, gentle, invisible. Gone. I felt the familiar sting in my eyes, but I swallowed it. No tears. Not here. I reminded myself, people can't value what they don't understand. My wife used to say that too, and she was right. Later, as the night deepened and the laughter grew louder, I sat alone at a small table, my hands resting on the polished wood of the chair. I traced the carvings again, those little acorns, and thought about how love ages differently than people do. It doesn't wrinkle or fade. It just becomes quieter. People still debate whether humiliation teaches humility or just pain. I think it teaches both. By the time the band started playing its third set, the laughter had turned from bright to blurry. People were dancing, shouting over the music, taking photos that would be forgotten before the champagne lost its bubbles. I sat at the edge of it all, watching, invisible but oddly calm. It's strange how age changes your view of humiliation. When you're young, it burns. When you're old, it just confirms what you already suspected. I had expected to be out of place here. I just didn't think it would sting this much. Michael passed by with his wife, Karen, both carrying smiles so tight they could have been painted on. She gave me that look, polite concern mixed with mild disapproval. "Dad, are you doing okay? You've been sitting alone." "I'm fine," I said, though my voice cracked a little. I'm just watching the fun." She nodded, not buying it. "It's a beautiful chair," she said, clearly trying to mend the earlier damage. "Very symbolic." "Symbolic," I repeated. "Of what?" "Oh, you know. Roots family tradition," she replied, eyes already darting towards someone more interesting. "People appreciate that sort of thing." "Do they?" I asked softly, but she didn't hear me. She'd already turned away to greet another guest. That's when I heard a small voice behind me. Grandpa Emily stood there, her hands clasped around her bouquet. Eyes soft but uncertain. She looked tired. Weddings do that even to the happy ones. "Can we talk for a second?" "Of course," I said, standing up slowly. My knees complained, but I ignored them. We walked out into the hallway where the music dulled behind the heavy doors. The air was cooler here, quieter. She leaned against the wall, exhaling deeply. "I'm sorry if people were rude," she said. "I didn't mean for that to happen." I smiled gently. "You didn't do anything wrong, sweetheart. You're not responsible for what others understand or don't." Her eyes softened. "It's a beautiful chair. Really, I don't think they got it. You know how these things are. Everyone expects crystal and silver." "I know," I said. "That's why I brought wood." She chuckled quietly. "Grandma would have loved it." That name hung between us like smoke. My throat tightened. "She would have," I whispered. "She'd have sat in it first, too, just to test it before anyone else could." Emily smiled at that, the first real one of the night. "Mom told me stories about that oak tree," she said, "about how it saved the house during the hurricane." I nodded. "It did. Cracked in half, but it fell the right way. That tree took the hit for us. We rebuilt around it." Emily's brow furrowed. "You know, I barely remember that house. Dad never wanted to go back." "Your father's got his own ghosts," I said. "He thinks forgetting is the same as healing." "It's not." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she reached out and touched my arm. "Thank you for coming, Grandpa. I'm really glad you're here." Those words, simple, quiet, did something to me. Maybe because they were the first honest ones all day. I wanted to say something profound back, something wise about family or forgiveness, but all that came out was, "You make me proud, Emily, more than you know." She smiled again, gave my arm a squeeze, and slipped back inside, leaving me alone with the echo of her perfume and the low hum of the air vents. I stood there for a while, thinking about how much of family love exists in the small, unspoken gestures. The way people look back when they think you're not watching. The way a word like grandpa can still melt a 70-year-old heart. When I returned to the hall, the chair had been moved again, now tucked behind a table, filled with gifts. Almost like they wanted it out of sight. I didn't mind anymore. It had already done its job. I sat beside it and watched as Emily and her new husband took to the dance floor. They moved easily like they'd practiced spinning in perfect time with the music. The crowd clapped and cheered. I remembered when her grandmother and I danced for the first time barefoot on our porch after painting the kitchen. No audience, no lights, just laughter and paint on our arms. I thought about all the weddings I'd attended in my life, and how each one seemed to blur together over time. But this one would stand out not for the laughter or the speeches, but because of that chair, that small wooden witness no one wanted to see. There's an old truth in families. The things we hide today become the stories we regret tomorrow. People still debate whether traditions matter anymore in modern families. I think they matter because they remind us who we were before we became who we are. The night stretched on. People left one by one, and soon the hall grew quieter. I stayed behind to help one of the staff clean up an older woman with kind eyes and tired hands. She nodded toward the chair. "That's fine work," she said. "You don't see craftsmanship like that anymore." "Thank you," I said. "It's from an old oak that's seen more storms than I have." She smiled. "Then it's strong wood." Stormwood. That phrase stuck with me. Stormwood. I liked it. It sounded like something that deserved respect. I looked at the chair differently after that, almost reverently. When I finally went to leave, I found a quiet spot by the door and looked back one last time. Emily was laughing again, barefoot now, her hair coming undone, her happiness unguarded. She didn't look like someone who'd forgotten where she came from. She looked like someone who might remember someday. As I stepped out into the cool night, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. Old man, worn suit, tired eyes, and behind me, through the glass, the chair stood alone under the chandelier's glow. For a moment it looked almost alive, like it was breathing in the quiet. On the drive back to my motel, I replayed the night in my head, the laughter, the silence, Emily's apology, the way the city lights blurred past like falling stars. I wasn't angry anymore, just resolved, because I knew what that chair really was. It wasn't a piece of furniture. It was a message one that might take years to read, but she would read it someday. People still debate whether gifts should be useful or meaningful. I've always believed the best ones are both. You can sit in them, but they also sit with you like memories waiting quietly until you're ready to listen. That night before I went to bed, I whispered a small prayer, not for forgiveness, not for understanding, just for patience, because love, like wood, needs time to show its strength. The morning after the wedding, the mansion grounds were quiet again, almost too quiet, like the silence that follows a storm. I stood at the edge of the garden watching workers pack up decorations, folding chairs, and leftover flowers into boxes. It struck me then how fast forever can be cleaned up. A day ago, that place had been filled with laughter and music, people dancing and clinking glasses, making promises under the chandelier's glow. Now it looked hollow, as if the joy had been rented, to returned once the contract ended. Only one thing hadn't been packed away: my chair. It sat near the back doors, half in shadow, ignored, but somehow dignified. I walked toward it slowly, my shoes crunching over gravel. The morning air was cool, and a faint breeze carried the scent of crushed petals. When I reached the chair, I ran my hand along the armrest, tracing the carvings once more. The oak leaves, the small acorns, the lines that told a story only I understood. Someone had placed a folded napkin over the seat, maybe to protect it, or to make it look less out of place. I lifted it off, smiling faintly. "You don't need protection, old friend," I murmured. "You've survived worse than parties." That's when I heard a voice behind me. "Dad." I turned. Michael stood there, hands in his pockets, looking uneasy. He still wore the same suit from last night, though the tie hung loose, now his hair slightly mussed. For a moment he looked like a little boy again, the same nervous expression he used to wear whenever he broke something. "I was hoping to see you before you left," he said. "Well?" I said, nodding toward the chair you found me. He approached, stopping a few feet away. "Listen, about last night. I didn't mean to make you feel embarrassed." I finished for him, not unkindly. He sighed. "Yeah, that. It's just..." Karen thought the chair might clash with the decor. She wanted everything uniform. "You know how she is about appearances." "I do," I said. "And I know how you are about not upsetting her." He frowned, but didn't argue. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The wind rustled the ivy on the fence, and the sound reminded me of the storms that tree had once endured. Finally, he said quietly, "I should have stood up for you." I looked at him. "You don't owe me that, son. What I do wish is that you'd remember why that chair matters." He glanced at it confused. Because of the oak, because of what it represents, I said. Strength that doesn't show off, protection that doesn't demand thanks. You and your sister grew up under that tree. You played in its shade. It took the brunt of the storm so you could have a roof over your head. It's more than wood, Michael. It's sacrifice carved into grain. He swallowed hard, his gaze dropping to the ground. I didn't forget the storm, he said softly. I just stopped thinking about it. You know, life moves on. That's what people say, I replied, but moving on doesn't mean leaving everything behind. Some roots are worth keeping. He nodded, eyes glistening slightly. Emily told me you two talked last night. She really loves that chair. She asked to bring it home. I felt my chest tighten. She did. He smiled faintly. Yeah. I loaded it into her car this morning before you came down. She said it makes her feel connected to Grandma, said it feels alive somehow. For a second, I couldn't speak. I just stood there, letting that feeling sink in that maybe the message had found its way through after all. Michael shifted awkwardly, rubbing the back of his neck. You know, Dad, when I was a kid, I used to think you cared more about your tools than people. I never really understood why you spent so many hours in that workshop. But last night, watching you with that chair, I think I get it now. It wasn't just work. It was memory. I smiled. It was my way of staying sane. He chuckled. Maybe that's something I should learn from you. Maybe, I said. Then after a pause, tell Karen I said thank you for the wedding. She put a lot of heart into it. He nodded, looking almost guilty. I will. As he turned to leave, I called after him. Hey, son. He stopped. Don't wait until you're my age to build something that lasts. He looked at me, really looked this time, and nodded slowly before walking away. When he was gone, I sat down on the stone bench near the garden's edge, feeling the weight of both exhaustion and peace settle into my bones. There's a strange balance in growing old. You learn to let go without giving up. You stop expecting recognition, and somehow that makes the quiet victories feel bigger. Later that afternoon, when I went back to the motel, I found a small note slipped under my door. The handwriting was neat, familiar. It was from Emily. Grandpa, thank you for the chair. We brought it home and put it by the window in our new house. It feels like it belongs here, like it's guarding us. Daniel says it's the most meaningful gift we got. I'm sorry for last night. I didn't know how much it meant until I sat in it this morning. I felt Grandma. I felt you. Love, Emily. I read that letter 3 times before setting it on the nightstand. For the first time in years, I slept without that heavy feeling in my chest. The next morning, I drove back home. The highway shimmered in the heat and the fields rolled by golden and endless. When I pulled into my driveway, the old oak stump greeted me, cracked, weathered, surrounded by wildflowers I hadn't planted. I stood there for a while thinking about how everything eventually returns to the earth, but not before leaving something behind. That tree had given me shade, safety, and now a legacy. Inside the workshop, the air still smelled like sawdust and coffee. I ran my hand over the empty workbench. The chair was gone, but its outline remained a faint, dustless square proof that something once stood there. Funny how absence can be louder than presence. I sat in the corner chair, the one my wife used to use when she'd bring me tea. Well, Martha, I said aloud. They laughed at it. Just like you said they might. But she's got it now. Our Emily. She understood in the end. The wind crept through the open window, carrying the faintest whisper through the leaves outside. It almost sounded like laughter, not mocking this time, but warm. I closed my eyes and let it wash over me. People still debate whether legacy is something you leave behind or something that stays alive in those who remember you. I think it's both. It's the chair they sit on, the story they finally understand, the silence that no longer feels empty. That night I wrote back to Emily. Dear Emily, you don't need to thank me. Just promise me you'll keep that chair in the family. When the time comes, tell your children what tree it came from and why it stood tall when everything else broke. That's all the inheritance I can offer. Love, Grandpa. As I sealed the envelope, I felt something like peace, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand applause. Just the steady rhythm of a life finally understood. Weeks passed after the wedding, and the house returned to its usual rhythm of silence. The mornings began with the kettle whistling the hum of the refrigerator and the soft creak of the floorboards that had learned my footsteps by heart. I'd wake up, brew my coffee, and sit by the window where the oak used to stretch its arms toward the sky. Without it, the horizon looked bare, emptier, somehow like a photograph with someone erased from it. Yet I didn't feel lonely, not really. Because every morning when the sunlight touched that empty patch of grass, I could almost see the shadow of the chair in Emily's new home glowing under that same light. That thought kept me company. Then one afternoon I got a call. The number flashed across the old landline I barely used anymore. Grandpa Emily's voice burst through the static, bright and alive. You're not going to believe this. Her excitement made me smile. Try me, I said. She laughed. Okay, so, you know how we put the chair in our living room by the big window? Of course, I said. The one facing east. Exactly. Well, last night there was this huge storm, thunder lightning the works, and I was terrified it might break the window. Daniel was at work, so I sat in the chair to wait it out. I leaned forward in my seat. You didn't? I murmured. I did, she said, giggling. And you know what's crazy? The next morning, when we woke up, the tree across the street had fallen straight onto the sidewalk right in front of our house. If it had fallen the other way, it would have crushed the window where the chair was. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she said, quieter now, Daniel said that chair is our good luck charm, but I don't think it's luck. I think it's, I don't know, something deeper. I closed my eyes. That chair's made of storm wood, I said softly. It remembers how to stand its ground. There was a pause on the line, the kind that carries emotion too big for words. Then Emily said, Grandpa, can I ask you something? When you built it, did you know? Did you know it would mean this much? I chuckled. I hoped. But hope is like planting a seed. You don't know what'll grow until the rain comes. She sighed, gently content. Well, whatever you did, it worked. Everyone who comes over asks about it. And I tell them everything about Grandma, about the hurricane, about you. I think they finally get it. Her words filled the quiet corners of my kitchen. For the first time in years, I felt seen without even being there. I'm proud of you, Emily, I said. You're keeping our story alive. After we hung up, I walked out to the yard. The stump of the oak sat like an old monument surrounded by wild violets that had sprouted on their own. I knelt beside it, running my fingers along the rough bark that remained. You did your job, I whispered, and now she's doing hers. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the crickets outside. I thought about legacy, not as a grand idea, but as something practical, living, ordinary. My father's hammer was still hanging on the wall, my wife's old recipe cards still tucked in a drawer, the smell of sawdust still clinging to the floorboards. Maybe legacy wasn't about what we leave behind, but how we teach others to carry what matters. The next day, Emily sent photos. The chair looked perfect against the sunlight, a soft, golden glow warming the oak's surface. Beside it was a framed note in her handwriting made by my grandfather from the oak that saved our family. I stared at that picture for a long time. It wasn't pride I felt. It was something quieter, something like fulfillment. Later that week, I got another call this time, from my son, Michael. His tone was hesitant, careful. "Dad, I wanted to thank you," he said. "Emily won't stop talking about that chair. It's become kind of a symbol for the family. She even made me promise that when you're gone, we'll keep it safe." I laughed softly. "When I'm gone, huh? She's making plans already." He chuckled too, then turned serious. "You know, I've been thinking about that night, the hurricane. I barely remember it, but Mom told me once that you stood by the door for hours holding it shut so we wouldn't blow away. I never thanked you for that." "You were 5, I said. "You thanked me every time you smiled after." Still, he said quietly, "Thank you for that. And for everything since." Those words, so simple, landed like a weight lifted off my chest. For years, I'd thought silence was our family's default language. Turns out sometimes silence just means waiting for the right words. In the days that followed, I went back to my workshop with a renewed purpose. The air smelled of pine and dust, and the afternoon light sliced through the slats, painting stripes across the floor. I pulled out a fresh slab of oak, the last piece left from that tree. I didn't know exactly what I'd make this time. Maybe another chair, maybe a small table, maybe nothing more than a carving. But I knew I needed to work. Creation, after all, was how I prayed. As the blade met the wood, the sound filled the room like an old song. My hands still remembered what to do. Even the small tremors didn't bother me anymore. I worked slowly, carefully, listening to the rhythm of the grain. I thought of my wife's voice humming behind me, thought of Emily's laughter echoing through the phone, thought of Michael's apology. All of it fused into one steady beat, one pulse of belonging. Sometimes when you're shaping wood, you reach a moment where you have to trust your instincts, where the plan gives way to the grain, and you follow what the material wants to become. That's what life felt like now. For years, I'd been trying to control it, to carve it into what I thought was right. But maybe it was never about control. Maybe it was about trust in time, in people, in the unseen strength passed down through generations. When I stepped back, hours later, the sun had dipped low, and I realized I'd carved something without thinking, a small heart into the edge of the wood. Not for show, just for me. I smiled at it. Maybe this would be my last project, or maybe the start of something new. Who knows? That night I wrote another letter to Emily. I didn't send it, I just tucked it into my desk drawer. It read, "Dear Emily, every family has a story carved into it somewhere. Ours just happens to be in wood. Take care of the people you love, the way that chair takes care of you. Steady, quiet, unshakable. And remember, the strongest things in life aren't loud. They endure. Love, Grandpa." I sealed the envelope anyway, just in case I ever needed her to find it someday. Then I sat by the window, watching the stars blink awake. The sky looked clean, like someone had sanded away the day's rough edges. And for the first time in a long while, I felt finished, not empty, not waiting, just peacefully complete. People still debate whether it's better to build for yourself or for those who come after. I think you build for both, because in the end, we're all sitting on someone else's chair, whether we realize it or not. It was a month later when the letter arrived. The envelope was soft and cream-colored, addressed in Emily's handwriting. My heart did a little jump seeing it in the mailbox, like it hadn't done in years. I took it inside, set it on the kitchen table next to my coffee mug, and stared at it for a long moment before opening it. There's something sacred about letters, the way they carry a person's rhythm, their pauses, their invisible warmth. When I finally unfolded the paper, her words spilled out like sunlight. "Grandpa," it began, "I found something. I don't know if you meant for me to, but I think you did." I blinked, frowning a little. Then I read on. "Last night, Daniel and I were moving the chair into the nursery. Don't freak out. That's a story for later, and when I was cleaning underneath, I felt something loose under the seat. There was a small panel, and inside it a folded letter. 'It's yours.' I froze. My mind jumped back, decades back, to the workshop, to the night I'd built the final frame. I remembered tucking a note into the hollow base of the chair, sealing it beneath the seat before nailing it shut. I hadn't meant for anyone to find it so soon, maybe not even in my lifetime. It was supposed to be discovered long after I was gone." Emily's letter continued. "I read it, Grandpa. I hope that's okay. It made me cry, but the good kind of cry. You wrote about Grandma, about the storm, about what you wanted us to remember. Daniel and I stayed up all night talking about it. We realized we don't just want the chair to sit in the house, we want it to mean something. We're thinking about planting a tree in our yard from one of the acorns you carved into it. Maybe one day our kids will sit under it too." I read that part twice, my eyes blurring. I'd nearly forgotten I'd slipped that tiny acorn into the chair's hollow one, from the original oak, preserved and polished. I smiled. "Smart girl," I whispered. The next paragraph was shorter, shakier, as if she'd written it through tears. "Thank you for building something that outlived your pride. I hope I can do the same one day. Love, Emily." The words hit me deep. I sat back in my chair, letting them settle into me like the warmth of a fire after a cold walk. I hadn't cried in years, not even at my wife's funeral. The tears had simply refused to come. But now, sitting there with Emily's letter trembling in my hands, they did. Quietly, without warning. I thought of that hidden note, the one I'd written in the middle of the night decades ago, my heart full of loss and stubborn hope. In it I'd written, "Whoever finds this, remember we are only as strong as the things we choose to hold on to. The storm doesn't ask who you are before it tests you. It only shows you what's worth saving." Now Emily had read it and she understood. That was enough. The next few weeks felt lighter. I started spending more time outside, trimming the bushes, repainting the porch railing, even fixing the squeaky gate. It's funny how life feels less heavy once you know your story's been received. I even began teaching myself small woodworking projects again. Picture frames, birdhouses, nothing grand, just simple things that filled the quiet. One evening as the sun dipped low, Michael drove up the driveway. He didn't call ahead, just showed up like old times. When he stepped out of the car, he looked more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. He carried something wrapped in brown paper. "Got a surprise for you, Dad," he said. He set it on the table and peeled away the paper. Inside was a photo frame, smooth and polished, holding a picture of Emily and Daniel sitting in the chair, smiling, her hand resting on her belly. "They told me not to tell you," he said, grinning. "But I figured you'd want to know early. You're going to be a great grandfather." For a long moment I couldn't breathe. Then I laughed, a deep, shaking laugh that startled even me. "That chair's working overtime," I said. Michael laughed too. "Emily says it's her good luck charm. She won't sit anywhere else when she reads or paints. Says it makes her feel grounded." "Grounded," I repeated softly. "That's the word." We sat on the porch together, watching the sun set behind the empty spot where the oak used to stand. The air buzzed with the low hum of summer insects. After a while, he said, "You know, I used to think building things was your way of avoiding people. Now I realize it was your way of talking to them. It's easier to say what you mean when your hands are busy," I said with a smile. Wood doesn't interrupt. He chuckled. Yeah, but it also doesn't hug you back. I looked at him, my son. The man who once couldn't look me in the eye without resentment. Now he sat beside me, his posture loose, his heart finally visible. That's what people are for, I said. You build the chair, but you let others sit in it. He nodded thoughtfully, staring out at the fading sky. You think Emily's kid will know the story someday, if she's anything like her mother? I said she'll make sure of it. When he left that evening, I stood in the doorway long after his car disappeared down the road. The world felt different now, quieter, yes, but not lonely. More like a long exhale after years of holding your breath. That night, I sat at my workbench again, lit only by the small desk lamp. I pulled out a small block of oak from my last pile and began carving another acorn, this one smaller, smoother, like the ones I used to make for Emily when she was a child. I wasn't sure what I'd do with it yet, maybe send it to her, maybe keep it by my bedside. It didn't matter. Some creations are their own reward. As the knife moved, I thought about how families are like trees, the roots buried in memory, the trunk made of shared effort, and the branches reaching toward the future. Sometimes storms come and break a few limbs. Sometimes lightning scars the bark. But if the roots are deep, the tree still stands. And sometimes, even after it's gone, its wood still shelters those who remember. When I finished, I set the tiny acorn beside the framed photo of Emily and Daniel. The baby bump was small, almost hidden, but I could see it. And I could see the future, a house full of laughter, a child running around that same chair, tiny hands tracing the carvings I once made. People still debate whether love fades or changes shape as the years go on. I think it doesn't fade. It just settles deeper like roots finding their final soil. I turned off the lamp, leaving only moonlight to spill across the workbench. The room felt alive again, full of the quiet hum of memory and the faint smell of oak. Before heading to bed, I whispered into the dark, "Thank you, old tree. You gave us more than shelter. You gave us each other." Autumn came sooner than expected that year. The mornings turned crisp, and the air outside carried that faint smell of burning leaves and faraway rain. I found myself waking earlier just to watch the fog drift across the field where the oak once stood. The stump had started to fade under moss, soft and green, as if time were gently tucking it in for its long sleep. I didn't mind. I liked seeing nature reclaim what was hers. It felt right, like the closing of a long, kind chapter. Then one day, Emily called again. Her voice trembled not from sadness this time, but from excitement. "Grandpa," she said breathlessly, "the baby's coming early. We're heading to the hospital now." For a moment, I couldn't move. My heart stumbled, then picked up speed. "Go," I said. "Go and tell that little one the world's been waiting." She laughed, nervous and glowing. "I will. I promise I'll call you when she's here." Hours passed. I sat in my armchair, the one that used to face the TV but now faced the empty window. The house creaked softly, as if listening with me. Every minute stretched like an hour. I brewed coffee, then forgot to drink it. I walked to the workshop, touched the tools, rearranged nothing, and walked back out. When the phone finally rang again, my hands shook as I picked it up. "It's a girl," Emily whispered through tears. "Her name's Martha." For a second, I couldn't speak. My throat tightened until it hurt. My wife's name, my Martha reborn, in a voice I loved just as fiercely. I pressed the phone to my chest, eyes wet, whispering, "Welcome back." "She's beautiful," Emily went on. "Dark hair, strong little fists, loud lungs. Daniel says she's got your stubbornness already." "I'll take that as a compliment," I said, my voice breaking just a little. "How's the chair?" Emily laughed. "It's right here beside me. I sat in it through half the labor. Don't ask how we got it to the hospital, but it's here." I laughed too, then exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding all day. "Then she's already part of the story," I said. "That chair's officially witnessed 4 generations now." The next morning I drove to the hospital. It was a long trip, and my knees complained the whole way, but my heart had never felt lighter. When I reached the maternity ward, the nurse smiled when I introduced myself. "Oh, you're the grandpa," she said with a grin. "The one who built the chair. Word travels fast, I suppose." When I stepped into the room, the first thing I saw wasn't Emily or Daniel. It was the chair. It stood beside the bed, the sunlight catching its polished arms like warm honey. And in Emily's arms was the tiniest bundle of life I'd ever seen. My great-granddaughter, my Martha. She was asleep. Her tiny hands curled under her chin. Emily smiled when she saw me. "She likes it when I rock in the chair," she said softly. "Calms her right down." I approached slowly, afraid to breathe too loud, as if the moment might vanish if I did. When she placed the baby in my arms, I felt the years fall away. My hands, these old, calloused, trembling hands, held something impossibly new. She opened her eyes for a moment, a flicker of blue like the sky after rain, and I swear she looked straight at me. Not through me, at me. "She's got your eyes," Emily said quietly. I smiled. "Then she'll see the world as a place worth building." We sat together like that for a while, 3 generations, with the chair standing watch beside us like an old guardian. At some point, Daniel took a picture me holding Martha, Emily's hand on my shoulder, the chair glowing in the background. I didn't realize it then, but that photograph would later become the cover of their family album. When I left the hospital that evening, the air outside was sharp with the promise of winter. I looked up at the pale moon, feeling strangely light. I thought about the oak again, how its roots had gone deep, so deep they were probably still there under my land, feeding the earth quietly. Life is like that. Even when you think something's gone, it keeps giving just beneath the surface. Back home, I wrote in my journal something I hadn't done in years. Today, I wrote, "I met the future. She fits perfectly in my hands." In the following weeks, Emily sent photos every few days, the baby growing, smiling, discovering her toes. In every picture, the chair appeared somewhere in the background, sometimes beside the crib, sometimes near the window, sometimes holding a blanket draped over the backrest. It had become part of the home's rhythm, woven into their daily life. Then one evening, she sent a video. In it, baby Martha sat in Emily's lap while Emily gently rocked in the chair. She looked into the camera and said, "Say hi to great-grandpa." And the baby, as if on cue, reached out her little hand, brushing the air. It's funny how moments like that can fill the space of an entire lifetime. I replayed that video so many times the sound of her giggle still echoed in my dreams. A week later, Emily called again. "Grandpa, we're planning something," she said. "A family gathering next month to celebrate Mom's birthday and to introduce Martha properly. You have to come." I hesitated, then smiled. Wouldn't miss it for the world. That night, I stood in the workshop one last time before the trip. The smell of sawdust, the hum of the old light bulb, the faint marks of decades of work on the wooden table. It all felt like a heartbeat, slow and steady. I placed my palm against the workbench, closed my eyes and whispered, "We did it, old friend, because we had." The oak, the chair, the generations, all of it had come full circle. People still debate whether a legacy ends when you die or when you're forgotten. But I think legacy is what you build, that keeps building after you're gone. The chair that holds new laughter, the tree that grows from an old root, the baby named after the love that started it all. When I went to bed that night, the moonlight fell across the floor in long silver bands. I slept deeply, peacefully, like someone who finally knew the story would go on with or without him. The day of the family gathering arrived like the soft return of spring. I hadn't seen so many cars in my driveway since Emily was a child. The sound of laughter carried through the air even before I opened the door. It felt foreign and familiar at once, a melody I'd forgotten the words to, but still knew by heart. When I stepped outside, Emily was the first to spot me. She ran toward me, her baby in her arms, radiant and smiling. "Grandpa," she shouted, her voice full of warmth that wrapped around me like sunlight. Behind her, Michael followed with Karen, both waving awkwardly, unsure whether to hug or apologize first. "You came," Emily said, slightly out of breath. "I told you I would," I said, chuckling. "You didn't think I'd miss meeting my namesake's namesake, did you?" She grinned. "She's been waiting to see you." She gently passed the baby into my arms. Little Martha blinked up at me, her fingers curling around my thumb. She had her mother's nose and her great-grandmother's calm expression, that quiet curiosity that always made me nervous, because it usually meant she was about to say something I wasn't ready for. I laughed softly. "Well, hello there, little one. Welcome to the chaos." The house was alive again. The smell of roasted chicken and freshly baked bread filled every corner. Laughter bounced off the walls. It had been years since this place felt like a home, and now it buzzed with voices, footsteps, and life. I noticed the chair had been brought along, too, placed right by the window, the sunlight pouring over it like blessing. Emily had even tied a little white ribbon around one armrest, as if dressing it for the occasion. After lunch, the family gathered in the living room. Daniel set up a camera to record a few family videos. I tried to protest, but Emily just smiled and said, "It's for history." So I sat in my chair, holding the baby, while everyone gathered around. The camera's red light blinked to life, and for a moment it felt like time itself was pausing to take note. Michael spoke first. "Dad," he said, clearing his throat. "I don't say this enough, but thank you for everything, for this house, this family, and for teaching us that it's not the big things that last, it's the ones built with love." I looked at him, my son, now a father, and soon a grandfather, and felt something unspoken finally rest between us, like a bridge rebuilt plank by plank. "You figured that out the long way," I said with a smirk, "but I'm proud of you for getting there." The room filled with laughter, warm and easy. Emily handed the camera to Daniel and took a seat on the armrest of the chair beside me. "You know," she said softly, "we've been talking about something." She glanced at Michael and Karen, who both nodded. "We want to start a small foundation in Grandma's name, the Oak Legacy. We'll plant a tree for every new baby born in the family, and each one will have your initials carved somewhere small, just like you did on the chair." I felt my throat tighten again. That's a beautiful idea." "It's more than that," Emily said. "It's our way of saying thank you, for the roots, for the shelter." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full thick with gratitude and memories too old for words. Even the baby seemed to sense it. She cooed softly as if giving her blessing. Later, when everyone had gone outside to take pictures under the maple trees, I stayed behind for a moment. The sunlight danced through the curtains, landing gently on the chair's surface. I ran my hand along the wood, feeling the familiar grooves. It had aged beautifully, the oak deepening to a golden brown, the carvings now smoother from years of touch. I could almost hear my wife's voice in that moment, gentle, teasing, proud. "You finally built something that outlived your stubbornness," she'd say. I smiled. "Yeah," I whispered, Guess I did. When Emily came back in, she found me sitting there, eyes closed, the baby asleep against my chest. "Grandpa," she whispered. "Are you okay?" I opened my eyes and smiled at her. "Better than I've been in a long time. You see that light coming through the window?" She nodded. "That's where your grandmother used to sit every morning with her coffee." She said it made her feel alive. Reminded her that no matter how many storms came, there'd always be another sunrise. Emily looked toward the window, the light now washing over both of us. "Do you think she'd be proud of us?" she asked quietly. I chuckled. "She already is. She's the wind in those trees outside. She's the patience in your heart. And she's definitely the stubbornness in that little one's cry." Emily laughed through her tears. "I hope Martha grows up to be just like her. She already has her name," I said softly. "That's a start." Outside, I could hear the others calling for us to join them. I handed the baby back to Emily and stood slowly, my knees creaking but steady. As we stepped out onto the porch, the golden light bathed everything. The trees, the faces, the laughter. It was one of those rare moments where life feels perfectly balanced, where past and future exist together in the same breath. Before the photo was taken, Emily placed the chair right in the center of the group. Everyone gathered around it, hands resting on the polished wood, and for a split second, it looked like that chair, that simple piece of oak, was holding the entire family together. When the camera flashed, I felt something ease inside me, a kind of peace that comes only after years of trying to make sense of it all. The oak had given its last gift, unity. People still debate whether objects can hold souls. Maybe they can't. But I know this: they can hold love. And love, when it's real, doesn't fade. It just changes its shape from tree to chair to child to memory. That night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in the quiet again. The stars shimmered outside, and the moonlight slipped across the floorboards like silk. The house felt full, even in its silence. I took one last look at the chair, smiling faintly. "You did good," I whispered. "Better than I ever could." And as I turned off the lights, I could almost hear the faintest creak of wood, not from age or strain, but from something deeper, something alive. The years have softened since then. The house stands quieter now, but it's a peaceful quiet, the kind that hums with memory instead of absence. Sometimes, when the morning light hits just right, I can still see her sitting there. Martha, my wife, rocking gently in that chair, smiling at something only she can see. Other times, it's Emily. I see her baby now, toddling around, laughing the echo of 4 generations, blending into one soft chorus of life. I've stopped counting the days and started measuring them by light, how it moves across the floor, how it touches the wood, how it reminds me that everything living leaves behind a trace. The chair remains at Emily's home now, but I don't miss it, because I know where it came from and what it carries. Every grain of that oak holds the sound of rain, the whisper of storms survived, and the warmth of every hand that's touched it since. Sometimes I wonder if one day, long after I'm gone, someone will sit in it and feel what I felt, not pride, not sorrow, but belonging. Maybe they'll hear the faint creak of time and know they're part of something larger, a story built long before them, still unfolding in quiet circles. So, if you ever find yourself holding something old, something handmade, don't dismiss it. Listen to it. There's history in the grain and love in every line. Thank you for staying with me tonight. If this story found a place in your heart, take a moment to subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm building here. Now, turn off the lights, take a breath, and rest easy. Good night.